Yeah. So let us wait for another few minutes,
Sure.
not more, so that our friends can grasp from the beginning, and then we start.
Sure. That's absolutely fine.
So yeah, I mean, my experience in Israel during the course that I had with you, I actually that was the experience. It really helped me to see and understand Bible as really, because we read the Bible in different parables and at different places, but for the Nepali understanding, for the Asian this part of the world, it's actually some words and the places are very like things we feel that it's maybe like a place, normal place, da 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 da. Da. I mean, we took it as very normal, but when I visited this. When you took me around all the places in a Capernaum and Siat Gali and all these places, wow! I mean, now I treasure it as like valuable than gold and silver. You know, it
Sure.
really helped me to see Bible from the literal perspective, to understand the Bible better. And I also, I mean, I see that. The Bible teaches, or pastors, Bible teachers, even like a theologian, at least at least has to visit this place under the solid tutor or teachers or a guide, to understand Bible, and like see Bible as a real alive word of God. Now I'm really blessed. Now when I see like a Bethsheba, then I remember how you took us around the Bethsheba. Oh yeah, this is the place, and Peter's house, and da da da, and Capernaum. This is where Jesus had done this. It's really unforgettable pictures actually as it comes in the mind. It really helps.
It does.
So I really encourage younger people, younger pastors and theologians to aim to have this experience.
Yeah, sometimes we can get scholarships from the World Council of Churches for travel. And the college can give a scholarship to cover the fees. At the moment, of course, nobody's flying anywhere for anything. So
Yeah, of course.
yeah. But it's true. You don't have to have been there. Of course, most Christians for most of history have not had that opportunity. But once you've been there, it changes how you read Scripture, because it does feel like you read it's a mention of a place and you go, I've been there. I know what that looks like. It changes. Yeah. You have memories of that place, and the biblical text brings up those memories for you as well.
Yeah. So thank you for your hard work. Of course, without your letter and your initiative, embassy will slap my paper on me. But I really thank you for such a hard work. At least this part of the world, one guy could come and also have this kind of experience. This experience will remember until I go and see the Lord. It's really wonderful.
Yeah. And I think you had Rodney come to Nepal as well.
Yeah.
A year or two earlier.
Yeah. So, all right. I think let us begin. We have 9:05. Since we have waited for 5 minutes, so let our friends come. But better we start. So let me pray first, and then I will hand over to Dr. Great Odin. Father, we thank you for such a grateful time, and also such a wonderful time together to learn about the way that you have created and a way that you have blessed the world and also the geographical uh, beautiness. Lord, I pray that help us to grasp the idea and also this treasure in our hearts so that we, as your servants, could understand your purpose and your desire for us better. We love you. We thank you. In Jesus' name we pray.
Okay, so welcome everybody. It's probably good if everybody else turns off their microphones. That way,
Yeah, so I'm also
whatever is
seeing-
happening in your house is not being broadcast all around the world. So we'll see
Yeah,
what
that is
happens.
why I'm so
And I'm going to move it into the here to the screen share, and that should be good. Okay, so this is session 3, and we're going to focus on the south of the country. Okay. Remember, normally I would do all of this in 1 hour. Okay, rocket ship. So we're taking 5 weeks to kind of slowly explore the country and also think about the intersection of text, biblical text, and place. I'm just going to, that's probably okay like that. So I want to go back to where we were last week, at the very end of last week, and we were looking at how different parts of the Bible reflect stories about Mesopotamia or stories about Egypt as part of the Fertile Crescent. And somebody asked a question about, so whereabouts was the Garden of Eden? And actually, I realized afterwards I had totally forgotten to mention the Garden of Eden, the flood story, Noah and the flood, and also the Tower of Babylon, all of which are stories from Mesopotamia in those first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis. So apart from all the other people and places we talked about, and I've added in Jacob and Laban, those stories in around about chapter 26, 27 or thereabouts in Genesis. The stories that are set far, far away over there to the east are, of course, like the Eden story, the flood story, and the Tower of Babel, and also the book of Job. Job is not a story from Palestine. Job is a story which is off to the east, far away in the east, in the land of Nob. We have no idea where that land was, but far, far away in the east. So again, Mesopotamia. So just reminding us, these are the things we talked about at the end of last week, where the Bible is connecting with Mesopotamia, the modern day Iran and Iraq and northern Syria and southern Turkey. And then Egypt features with stories about Abraham, Joseph, of course, Moses, the Exodus. Egypt is the regional power that really controls everything most of the time. And after Alexander the Great, you have the Ptolemies based in Egypt who control Palestine down to and including Cleopatra, the famous queen, with her boyfriend Mark Antony, and the city of Alexandria as a major center for Jewish diaspora life. Really, really important part of the Jewish community outside of Palestine at the time. And then, of course, Herod himself is part of that dynamic between Egypt and Rome and Palestine. And even if you think about it in Matthew's story with the birth of Jesus, where do Mary and Joseph go with the baby Jesus? Down to Egypt. So Egypt is very much part of the story as we go through. So that's just a recap from last week, and also an acknowledgement that I had totally overlooked the stories that are in Genesis chapter 1 to 11. So the Garden of Eden, the flood stories, chapter 6, 7, 8, 9, and the Tower of Babel in chapter 10. Okay, so this week we're going to take a slice across the country. So I mentioned last week these 10 regions: the coastal strip, number 1, the Shafela, the hilly country, gentle hills. You probably wouldn't even think they were hills because they're not proper mountains. Okay, the Judean hill country. It's still only like I don't know. I can't remember off the top of my head, but something like 1,000 meters above sea level. Just a baby hill. Okay, from Nepal. The Judean desert, tiny little rain shadow desert on the eastern side of the hill country of Judea. Down in the south, the Negev, the central hill country, a little bit to the north, right in the middle, what today we call the West Bank. The Jordan Rift Valley, number 7, running up and down there. These always come through together, I'm not sure why. The plain of Jezreel and Galilee up in the north. And then over the Jordan, you've got Transjordan, or the other side of Jordan. So today we're going to look at 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay? So we're looking at that cluster that's down at the southern end of the biblical land. So is everybody clear where we're heading? Okay. So we looked, I think we actually created this image last week when we were, thank you, when we were looking at the shape of the land. And so we're not going to focus on the coastal strip today, but we are going to look at the light green, the Shafela, the brown orangey colour, then down onto the other side and then further south. So we'll see how that goes. Okay, the Shafela. Now, if we get time, and I think we might, if we get time, I will also give you just a brief overview of the history of Jerusalem as one particular place, because it's in this space. Okay, so these are the hills. If you land at Ben Gurion Airport and you start to drive up to Jerusalem in a little minibus or a shurut or a taxi, these are the hills you're going to drive through. They're just gentle hills. And they're pretty good for farming. There's lots of timber and lots of fields. So this is, I've got like 4 or 5 photos from this area. So this gives you one view on the rolling hills of the Shafela. This is another example. Basically, because of these hills, there were only 1 or 2 roads that led from the coast up towards Jerusalem. And so if you controlled those roads, you controlled everybody. Okay. Again, this gives an idea. Towards the back of the photo, you're looking towards the coastal plain. In the foreground, you have one of these, just a bit of a bump. It's not a serious hill, but it is green enough and fertile enough that you can grow crops and certainly run sheep. This is vines, grapevines being grown by modern Israeli farmers. And this is near Lachish. And Lachish was the 2nd largest town in the kingdom of Judah in the old days. So it's in the Shafela. The Shafela, by the way, I'll just go back to it. The Shafela was where the Philistines are down on the coast and the Israelites are up in the hills, and the Shafela is where they bumped into each other. Okay, so it's where the battles often took place. Battles like King Saul, King David fighting the Philistines. This is where it happened. Not the vineyard, but I mean in those hills. Okay, that's the Shephelah. Gentle rolling hills that only have one or two valleys that let you easily get up to the top of the plateau at Jerusalem. So then we have a section which is the southern part of the central mountain range. And we saw the other day that these mountains are also continue on the other side of the Jordan. So this is the area around Jerusalem and Bethlehem and Hebron. Okay, so they're the names we're going to be thinking of. So the hill country is a bit drier. These are limestone mountains, basically. So you can see the white limestone rock. You'll notice in the little valleys, what they call a wadi, you do get a little bit of moisture, and you can grow olives. Those are olive trees. And you might be able to see in the photo how they've built little stone terraces so that they can fill that with soil and plant trees where they wouldn't otherwise grow. So this kind of land can be used for farming, but it needs a lot of effort to create the terraces and to maintain the terraces. If they fall down, then they're no use. This lets you see how dry it can be, and also some of the terracing that you can see on the hill in the middle. This is looking towards Jerusalem in the background. Again, there's mostly pine trees that are planted there at the moment, but again, you can see it's quite hilly, and you can only farm this land for crops if you create little patches using terraces. So this kind of area has never been able to support a very large population because there's not a lot of water and there's not a lot of good farming land. So the population is smaller. Whereas Egypt, plenty of water, plenty of flat land, big population. Even further north in Israel, more population than here in Judah. This is another, this again shows you the interaction, the road running along the bottom of the valley, because it's too hard to put it up on top of the hill. A little stream right in the bottom, and you can see the kind of terracing which has been put in there to try and get some agriculture with olive trees. But it's not really good country for crops. It is good country for an ambush. If somebody's coming along that windy road, it's a very difficult place in terms of invading armies. Again, this is out in sort of, if you like, Amos country near Tekoa. Amos was from the village of Tekoa, which is not very far from Bethlehem, and it's actually looking towards Jordan and towards the Judean desert. So you can see this is pretty tough country. You can grow a few scraggly trees, but really this is going to be goat country and sheep country. You're not going to grow wheat here. You're not going to grow grapes. Too difficult. Okay. So we've seen the Shephelah, and we've been in the hill country around Jerusalem and Bethlehem. Now we're going to go further south. Okay, so you've heard about the 3 wise men. These are their taxis. Okay, these are the camels, not those camels. But you can see as you go further south, very, very dry. This is a creek, but there's no water in the creek. Sometimes there will be. When it rains, this will be flooding with water. Very fast, very dangerous. Most of the time, very, very dry. Okay. Now this is an interesting one. That hill there is an artificial hill. It's a palace built for King Herod where he wanted to be buried. It's called Herodian. And they built a circular palace, several stories high. Then they scooped up the dirt all around it to make it look like a hill and disguise it. Except it's the only hill with a flat top. Okay, so it's very easy to find. And this is just outside Bethlehem. And it's between Bethlehem and Tekoa, where, as I mentioned, where Amos comes from. So in the time of Jesus, this was one of the most important fortresses for King Herod. Okay, and then for Antipas. It's a fascinating place in its own way. Again, this is from Tekoa. This is Amos country, looking east towards Jordan and across the Judean wilderness. Very dry, barren area. But you can run a few goats. They can nibble on the little shrubs. No one's ever going to build a town here. There's no water, and you can't grow crops. Okay, again, so this is later in the year. This is at Christmas time. Sheep just kind of looking anywhere they can to find anything to eat. You can see the dry hills, and in the distance you can see Jerusalem. And in the desert, people would go to the desert, particularly if they were hiding from the king. They'd go and live in the caves in the desert. And much later on, Christian monks who wanted some peace and quiet would go out to the desert. They might take over a cave, and sometimes they would brick in the front of the cave to make it a bit more comfortable. And you can see that here. You've got natural caves, but the one right in the middle has been turned into a little retreat house for a monk. Okay, and they'd go and stay. At one stage, the Judean desert is only very, very small, but at one stage it had several thousand monks living there, all trying to have peace and quiet. Leave us alone. Okay. This is a spectacular view of how in the desert, just outside Jerusalem, over the centuries, the water has eroded its way down, 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 down. You've got this little stream right down the bottom, cutting its way through the desert. Very dry and challenging place for people and for animals. And that's very close to the monastery of Mar Sabah, which is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, continuously operating Christian monastery in Palestine. And then there's this one, and I love this, is one of my favourites. There's a monastery right in the middle there, just hanging on to the side of the cliffs. And this is St. George's Monastery at Wadi Kelt. And the Wadi, you can see the valley winding its way through the hills. And there on the side, there's a small group of Christian monks living in this monastery, and they spend their days in prayer and study and gardening and so on. Okay, beautiful little place. But you can see this is the kind of desert area where John the Baptist was working. And this is the area where the Good Samaritan story is set. Okay, pretty rugged, dry country. And that's a close-up of St. George's Monastery. See, there's a little bridge right down the bottom across the creek, and then you walk down, you get to the bridge, you go back up and into the monastery. And it's a really beautiful place, and you can perhaps see they've built a little brick wall around to try and say to people, please stay out. This is our private place. We don't want to be disturbed. Now, this is just 10 minutes drive away from Jerusalem. Okay? It's between Jerusalem and Jericho. So, of course, in the Good Samaritan, there's a man going from Jerusalem to Jericho. Well, he's walking along the road past where this monastery later on would be built. And these days, with a car, it's only like 10, 15 minutes away from Jerusalem. So Jerusalem is right on the edge of the desert. Okay? And we don't often think about that. All right. Even in the desert, you will get springs, and particularly after heavy rain. And obviously, so water is very precious. And if you can find an oasis or a spring in the desert, then that's where you want to live, because you need water. So all of these places, this is in the same valley, what we call the Wadi Kilt, between Jerusalem and Jericho. Okay, again, the same set of, the same area between Jerusalem and Jericho. It's not very large, the hills are not very high, but it's very dry and very rugged. As you can see there, over the centuries, over thousands of years, the water and the wind has just dug its way down into a very deep valley. Until finally you come out at the other end, and what you can see there in the photo is the northern tip of the Dead Sea. In the distance, you can see the hills on the other side of the Jordan River. Okay, and Jericho will be just out of sight to the left. We'll probably have another shot of Jericho in a moment. You notice just directly in the foreground, because of irrigation, they've been able to grow crops there. And while I'm looking at this photo, that large brown dry area on the right-hand side, 20 years ago, that was covered by the water of the Dead Sea. But the Dead Sea is shrinking. So more and more dry land is appearing. Okay, and this you've probably heard of Qumran or the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is the place where, this is looking at the little ledge where Qumran is, and some of those caves are where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. Incredibly dry, no humidity, so the documents were preserved for almost 2,000 years because it was so dry. And again, you can see the Dead Sea, and on the other side of the Dead Sea, you can see the matching hills from Jordan. And we talked last week about Mount Nebo. Well, it's just over there on the other side of the lake. Okay, we're still at Qumran here. This is the famous Cave 4 where so many of the Qumran documents were kept. And that's inside Cave 4. Okay. Occasionally it rains, even in the desert. And when that happens, the desert blooms with beautiful little flowers. But it's quite rare, maybe only once a year. And again, another view. This is standing at Qumran, looking down towards the Dead Sea. You can see all the dry land where the Dead Sea has shrunk. The Dead Sea used to come right up to the base of the hills at Qumran. And then on the other side, you can see the identical hills that are part of Jordan on the other side of the Dead Sea. And in the background, you can see places like Mount Nebo. Okay. You might remember in the stories of David and Saul, David goes for a while to the spring at En-Gedi. And this is En-Gedi, and they call the little stream here the Nahal David, the stream of David. Okay, it's a little oasis about halfway down the western side of the Dead Sea. But you can see how dry the hills are. And the palm trees are only there because there's a spring of water. And this is the classic photo of the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is about 35% mineral salt. So it's slimy. And it is the water is so thick with mineral salts that you literally float on top of the water. You can't actually walk on the water, okay? That someone else does that. But you can just lie there and read a book, read a newspaper, whatever. That you just kind of float on top. Okay? When you come out, you're going to feel slimy because there's so much mineral salt in the water. Why is that happening? Well, once upon a time, the ocean, the Gulf of Aqaba and the Red Sea, came all the way up the Jordan Rift Valley, right up to the Sea of Galilee. Okay, massive inland water area. Over the millennia, the water has shrunk back and dried out. And so now you have the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River, and the Dead Sea. And the Dead Sea gets water coming into it all the time. Not as much as it used to, but it takes fresh water in and evaporates and evaporates. So the water disappears and the minerals are left. So the Dead Sea is this. It's not the kind of water you can drink, and no fish can live there because it's too salty. And on the banks of the Dead Sea, you can literally see the salt just encrusting the rocks. So guess what industry they have? They make salt. And also they make mud packs for ladies to put on their face and make them look more beautiful. Okay. So it's a place for cosmetic industries. Again, you can see the salt on the rocks. Okay, so we've come across the bottom we've done the Shephelah. We've looked at the area around Jerusalem. We've gone down into the Judean desert, right down to the Dead Sea. And now we're going to go south into what's called the Negev, which is the desert area to the south. And this is more like a permanent desert area. That's obviously a modern highway, and there's a little tiny stream running through the middle, but you can see the area is very dry. And we're just in the left-hand corner of the photograph, there's the ruins of an old village. Okay. So you can see how the earth, you can actually see the shape of the rocks, how they've been twisted and distorted over the years. Okay. Pretty dry. So this is that large area to the south of Israel. Okay, same kind of thing as we saw further north. The rivers have cut their way down into the rock. There's a little stream at the bottom. All right. That's not recommended, by the way, to sit on the edge of a cliff and have someone take your photo. It's not a good thing to do. I hope he had a rope around him. All right. Again, these are the sort of areas which are mentioned in books like Deuteronomy and Numbers, where the children of Israel are coming up through the desert, making their way towards Palestine. Okay. This is down in an area quite close to the Gulf of Aqaba, in the Timna Valley, and Timna was where they could mine copper. So people would go out there and work because the government, the king, wanted the copper. But it was a pretty rugged life. Okay. So we'll come back to Jerusalem in just a moment because we've got plenty of time up our sleeve. What I want to do now is just think about, with the Shephelah and with Judea and so on, where does the place cross over with the biblical text? Okay, so let's start with the Shephelah. Remember, these were the rolling hills on the western side of the hills of Judea. So I mentioned this was the frontier with the Philistines. The Philistines controlled the coast, but their best weapon, and the Philistines also controlled iron making. Okay, so if I've got a copper or bronze sword and you've got a sword made out of iron, you're going to win. Okay, so the Philistines very early on worked out how to make iron, and they had chariots pulled by horses. But they're no good in the hills. You can't use chariots in the hills. So you can see what's happening. The Israelites are coming down from the hills. If they come too far, they get flattened by the Philistines, who've got chariots and iron weapons. But if they get the Philistines to come up to them and fight in the hills, then the Hebrews, the Israelites, can win. Okay, so this is what's going on with Saul and David. So this is an area of military conflict. I mentioned earlier the second largest city in Judea was Lachish, and that's in the Shephelah. And also one of the places in the Shephelah, just outside Jerusalem, about 10, 15 minutes drive maybe, going west, is Kiryat Jearim, and that's in the books of Samuel and so on. That's where the Ark of the Covenant is captured by the Philistines, and then it's brought back to this place, Kiryat Jearim, and from there, eventually, David takes it up to Jerusalem. This is all about the conflict with the Philistines in the Shephelah. Today, it's one of the sites, possibly, of Emmaus, the Emmaus story from Luke's Gospel, chapter 24. There we go, Emmaus. All right. I should be looking at the other screen to tell me what's coming up next. Okay. So that's if that's the kind of things that are going on in the Shephelah. The Shephelah is where the Israelites and the Philistines are checking each other out, pushing each other. Sometimes the Philistines are winning, sometimes the Israelites are winning. Okay, that's the Shephelah. Up in the hill country of Judea, we've got characters like Abraham, okay, Abraham and Sarah, particularly at Hebron, which is in the south of the Judean area. And when David first becomes king, he's made king at Hebron before he captures Jerusalem. Stories like Ruth and Naomi are in this area, okay, because they're based at Bethlehem. That's where the story of Ruth is based. So the Bethlehem, and we know Bethlehem as the town of David, and later on the birthplace of Jesus. David, as I mentioned, and of course David will eventually capture Jerusalem, and we'll come back and talk about Jerusalem in a few minutes. Jerusalem is on the edge of this Judean hill country, and only became an Israelite town when it's captured by David around about 1100, 1050 BC. And then, of course, Jerusalem is the place where Solomon and all the kings of Jerusalem, all the kings of Judah, are based in Jerusalem from then onwards. And so we get prophets like Jeremiah and Isaiah and so on from Jerusalem. And of course, we also have, much later on, the stories of Ezra and Nehemiah as they rebuild Jerusalem during the Persian period. Now, there's lots and lots of other things happen in Jerusalem, including the temple, okay? But there's some of the things that are going to be happening in the Judean hills, okay? Now, if we go south, a bit further, keep going east, we get to the Judean wilderness. We're going to see the Dead Sea, we talked about.
Okay.
This is where David is going to go and hide when he's running away from Saul. We saw a couple of slides from the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran. And Masada, way down in the south, on the shores of the Dead Sea. We've got a few microphones open at the moment. At Masada is where Herod had his "this is where I will go if things get really bad" fortress at Masada. Really spectacular place to go and visit. So they're the kind of things that we're going to be talking about with the Judean wilderness. And of course, John the Baptist is in that area as well. Okay. All right. And then down in the south, in the Negev, well, we're talking about the country, the homeland of the Edomites, who are from the Old Testament. Okay. We're talking about places like Kadesh Barnea, which you'll find in Numbers and Deuteronomy. Sorry, I just need a drink of water. It's also where you'll find Beersheba. And Beersheba means 7 wells. So it's an oasis. There are lots of wells in the desert. It's where we'll find the Timnah copper mines, and we saw one of the photos from Timnah. It's also going to be a place called Etzion Geber, which is more or less the same as today's Israeli town of Eilat. This was the port, a seaport, at the northern tip of the Gulf of Aqaba, which would allow the kings of Judah to trade with Arabia and India, bring in spices and peacocks and all sorts of interesting things that they hadn't seen in that part of the world. Okay? So that's kind of where, in the southern part of the country, these are the people and the places that are connected with that part of the story. In a moment, I'm going to go across to the Jerusalem slides, but are there any questions or any points for clarification?
Yes, yes, sir. One of our brother Kamal Shrestha has questions about the Qumran community and the cave.
Sure.
Could you explain
Wow.
some
Yes.
more
Okay.
about?
That's a whole class on its own, but I'll just give you a couple of highlights. So there are perhaps two really important things about this place. One is historically, it was a kind of a monastery of priests who were in exile from the temple in Jerusalem from about 150 years before the time of Jesus until about until the Jewish-Roman War in about 65 or thereabouts. So for about 200 years, there's a group of very conservative Jewish priests living there because they're having an argument with the priests who run the temple. And the argument was mostly about a change to the calendar. Okay. Up until that time, the Jewish people followed a lunar calendar, and round about that time there was a change to adopt a solar calendar. Now, that means that some of the holy days are going to be on a different date. Okay, so the people at Qumran believe that God would not be happy if you changed the calendar and had the sacrifices at another time and all that sort of stuff. And they were led by somebody called the Teacher of Righteousness, at least originally. They were probably members of the Essene sect from Jerusalem. And they kind of ran a rival temple down in the desert. And they had very strict community life, and they had a very extensive library of sacred texts. Now, those texts are what we call the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they were first discovered in 1947, 1948, and they give us an incredible source of information about what Judaism was like around the time of Jesus. Okay, so we're not actually all that interested in the reasons why they went out to the desert, but we're very interested in their library. Okay, because wow, look at this stuff. Now, there's about 1,000 or 1,200 different books in the library. Okay, some of them are copies of the same book. Okay, like off the top of my head, maybe a dozen copies of the Psalms, 3 or 4 copies of Isaiah, several copies of Deuteronomy. Okay. So if you look at all of the documents, all of the scrolls, about a quarter of them are copies of the Old Testament in Hebrew. And they're our oldest copies of the Old Testament. In fact, they're about 1,000 years older than the next set of texts. That makes them really, really important for the history of the Bible text. Some of the books are books written by the people at Qumran that tell us what they believed and how they lived their daily lives and what their discipline practices were and what their hymn book was and so on. Okay, so that's really interesting in terms of understanding them. But they also had copies of the kind of books which Jewish people were reading at the time of Jesus. Books like Jubilees, First Enoch, and so on, which are in some cases part of the Apocrypha, but they're not part of the Jewish canon. So anyway, in brief, because I'm trying to be brief, it's one of my favourite topics, the Qumran community is really interesting for telling us what was going on in Judaism at the time of John the Baptist and Jesus. But even more importantly, because we discovered their library, we've got this incredible time capsule of documents from 2,000 years ago, which have been really, really important. So anyway, so that's a very brief summary of Dead Sea Scrolls and Qumran. Any other questions before we go and look at Jerusalem?
So, and then another question in the, which is by Brother Kamal. Is there still, the Qumran community is still available, or is there any evidence in the present day?
No. There are no Qumran people. I mean, the buildings are still there, what's left of them. I mean, they got smashed down, but the ruins of the monastery are still there. The graveyard is there, and we have their library. But the people long since gone. They were probably killed by the Romans in the year 68, when the Roman 10th Legion captured Qumran. Okay. Some of them might have fled south to Masada, but then the Romans killed them a few years later at Masada. Okay. So there are no groups of Essenes who are still part of Judaism today. But I guess, so it wouldn't be fair to make a comparison, but today Judaism has different groups. So you have ultra-Orthodox, and you have Orthodox, and you have conservative, and you have Reform, and you have secular, and that's just the big groups. None of them are exactly the same as the ancient Qumran people were, although they're perhaps a bit more like the ultra-Orthodox today, but not. I mean, that's not really fair to either of them. All right. So have a little chat about Jerusalem, which is part of this patch in the south. It's at the northern tip of the southern part of the country. So we'll start with this map. This is what's called the Madaba map. It's from a church in Madaba, in Jordan, which is very, very close to Mount Nebo. You might remember last week when I was looking for Mount Nebo, I said, there's Madaba, Mount Nebo will be just nearby. Okay. So they discovered this map in the late 19th century when some Christians were relocated to this town of Madaba by the Ottoman authorities, and they decided to build a church, and they chose a site which had once been a church, and they started clearing it away, and they found the floor of this ancient church from the 500s, and on the floor of this church was this lovely mosaic which included a map of Jerusalem at the time. So this is what Jerusalem looked like around about 500 AD. Okay. So let me just walk you through this map a little bit, and then we'll look at some of the other details. I don't really have a pointer, but you can see there's a line going from left to right, like the main street. Okay. and that's the Cardo Maximus, the main north-south road. And at the left-hand end, there's a little area, like a plaza, and in that plaza is a pillar, a column. And the Arabic word for that is amud. It's a pillar, amud. And then the gate that's at the left-hand end of the picture, as I look at it, is what we call the Damascus Gate, because it's if you go out that gate and keep going north, you will get to Damascus. Okay? You'll get to other places as well, but Damascus was the most important city at the time the name was given. But the local Palestinians, they call that gate Bab al-Amud. Bab is gate, al-Amud, the gate of the pillar. Now the pillar vanished hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Okay? But the local Palestinians still refer to that gate as Bab al-Amud, the gate of the pillar. And when we discovered the Madaba map, there's the pillar. And then when they did some excavations in Jerusalem at the Damascus Gate, they found many, many meters down below the road, they found the base of the pillar. Okay, so we know that this map does preserve a good memory of what Jerusalem was actually like in round about 500. Halfway along the main road, there's a very, very big building with a red roof and a cross and steps out the front going down to the front street. That is the Church of the Resurrection, or we tend to call it the Holy Sepulchre. But the Greek Orthodox, the local Christians, they don't call it the Holy Grave, they call it the Church of the Resurrection. Okay, and that you can see it's right on the main street, and that's the church built over Calvary and including the empty tomb. There's a smaller little road that's a little bit crooked to the east, to the top end of the photo, and that's the road which, if you went down that road today, it would take you to the Dome of the Rock, the Haram al-Sharif, and to the western wall, the Kotel, the ruins of the Jewish temple. All right. So it's a beautiful, interesting map. But let me turn it back into a diagram now. And I'm going all the way back in time, right back to 1000 BC, back to the time of David. All right. I don't think I can, there's no way for me to use a pointer to show you this, so you'll just have to listen as best we can. So the city of David, in the time of David, is that little circle, little oval that you can see it towards the bottom of the map. And around on either side of it are two valleys, the Kidron Valley and the Central Valley. And then further over to the west is the Hinnom Valley, which eventually comes down and joins the other two valleys. So the city of David is this little tiny spur with a valley on either side, and most importantly, it has the Gihon Spring. That's the reason the town was there. They had a spring with fresh water. Okay. Up to the north, outside the city, is Mount Moriah, where the temple would eventually be built. So that's 1000 BC. We come down to the time of Solomon, and that black line is representing the city walls. So the city has grown to the north. It now includes the temple built by Solomon. Okay. Happy to do questions at any point, so just stop me if there's something you need to ask. We go forward another couple of hundred years to 700 BC, the time of King Hezekiah. and the time of Isaiah the prophet. And the city has expanded. Lots and lots of people have moved to Jerusalem, partly because the Assyrians have destroyed Israel in the north. And so refugees have come south and have moved into Jerusalem. So Jerusalem has got much, much bigger. And now there's a wall going right across to the Hinnom Valley, as well as including the temple. Okay? In other words, Jerusalem is going to grow and shrink and grow and shrink over the centuries. By the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, the city is mostly growing up to the north and a little bit out to the west. But all that other stuff from Hezekiah has been abandoned. Nobody lives there anymore. Okay? The city is very much a fortress built around the temple, still with the Gihon spring. So when we come down now, we're looking at, this is what it looked like in the time of Jesus. Okay, now this will take a little bit of getting our ideas around it. You can see there's a larger kind of wall, which is in white. And that's the walls of the old city at the present time. Okay. And then shaded in the walls of the city of Jerusalem in the basically in the time just before Herod the Great. So just before the time of Jesus. This is what it looked like in the kind of Hellenistic and Persian period. So about 200 BC, something like that. I'm just going to try and stop this for a second and see if I can get rid of... there's a... I could see this little black mark in the back of all the slides. I'm just going to get rid of something that really shouldn't be there. Okay. Yep, good. I think that's fixed. Oh, there's one more. Okay. So we'll come back down to about here. Go back to live again. Okay. So the larger set of walls, that's the old city of Jerusalem today. And what we're looking at in the dark wall is what Jerusalem looked like a bit before the time of Herod the Great. Okay. By the time we get down to Jesus and the time where Jesus is killed in around about the year 30, the walls of Jerusalem have grown back out to the west, and Herod's palace is over there on the big hill to the west, and the temple is still the most important part of the city, and the walls go right down to the south to include the ancient city of David, the Gihon spring, and the pool of Siloam, because that's where they get their water from. Okay, and there's just a very simple wall, what they call the north wall, connecting the temple across to near Herod's palace. 10 years later, and right through until the destruction of Jerusalem, but from the time of Agrippa I, who was king from about 40 to 42, he extended the northern suburbs with a new wall to include the northern suburbs of Jerusalem. So Jerusalem, in the 40s and 50s and 60s of the first century, Jerusalem has become much bigger than at any other time in ancient history, because it's much bigger these days. And then we come down to, I'm not going to worry about, that's just map. That's probably going to be too confusing because it's mapping the existing city walls over the walls of the time. But that's showing the shape of the area that was there in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Okay, so these are some photos of what's called it's a scale model of Jerusalem. It's only a model, but it does show you how Jerusalem is built on the edge of the Kidron Valley. The city of David is that little finger coming down on the right-hand side, and then the Hinnom Valley running around, and Herod's palace on the left-hand side. So I'm going to just quickly walk through this, but notice how the temple dominates the city. Also notice the houses with the red roofs are where the rich people live. They're on top of the hill. The little houses that don't have red roofs, that are down the hill, are where the poor people live. Okay? Top of the hill, the air is fresh. Down the bottom of the hill, you get all the wastewater and the sewage and the garbage from the people on top of the hill. Okay? I'm sure that would never happen in Nepal, but that's what's happening in Jerusalem. Okay, so this is zooming in to give you a look at the temple. Massive, massive facility dominating ancient Jerusalem. Looking at it from the other side towards the temple, and the right-hand edge is you're just seeing a corner of Herod's palace. And if I had a way of doing a little kind of if I could highlight something for you, what I might do, I'll try doing it this way for a second. Just try making it bigger. This area here is Calvary, Golgotha. Okay? This area here is Herod's palace. Whoops. Didn't need to move it. Okay, and this new wall out here, this is the wall which is only built about 10 years after Easter. Okay, so when Jesus is crucified, this area here is outside the city walls at the time. Later on, the city walls get expanded. Okay. So go forward another 100 years again. Jerusalem is a pagan town controlled by the Romans. No Jews are allowed to go there. And they call it Aelia Capitolina. But they don't do a lot of work because it's just a place they've captured. But on what used to be the temple, they have a temple to Jupiter, the Roman god. And over on the left, on the west, what will become eventually the Holy Sepulchre, they have a temple of Venus and Aphrodite. Go forward now another couple of 100 years, and we're into the Byzantine period with the Emperor Constantine. The walls have been rebuilt. You've still got the Kidron Valley and the Hinnom Valley, but the central valley has been filled in and is just built over, so it's no longer there as a valley. And you're going to have, they're going to leave the temple site in ruins, and they're going to build a giant church of the Holy Sepulchre over the tomb. So it's going to look like this, and this is what we saw in the Madaba map. The main street running north-south. Up the northern edge, you've got the pillar at the Damascus Gate. And partway down, again, I'm going to use my pointer. Up here, you've got the Damascus Gate. Here, you've got the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And this is the main north-south road. Okay? Over here are the sort of ruins of the Temple of Jerusalem, which they've left as a ruin. Okay? So, just quickly wrapping this up for you. If I was with you in Jerusalem, I would take you to this part of the old city where we're standing in the Cardo Maximus. This is part of the 4th century and even 1st century, but certainly the 4th century main street of Jerusalem. Okay, the Cardo Maximus. On the side are shops, and then you've got the main street in the middle. Further over, you've got more columns and more shops. Okay? So perhaps it looks something like this. And this is an interesting mural. They're painted on the wall. So part of it are the ruins that are there, and then they've painted this scene, what it would have looked like as you look north up the Cardo Maximus. And notice down the bottom right-hand corner, there's a little boy with a baseball cap and a backpack and joggers who's receiving a pomegranate from a little Jewish girl in traditional Jewish dress. Okay, the past and the present kind of joining. Okay, and finally we get to what the old city looks like today and has ever since. Suleiman the Great built these walls in 1535. So again, I'll go back into the map itself. So down here is the city of David, but it's no longer inside Jerusalem. It's been abandoned. They ran out of money, okay? So instead of bringing the wall down here, they just took a shortcut and joined it over here because he didn't have enough money to finish the job. Up here is what used to be the temple and is now the Dome of the Rock and the El Aqsa Mosque. And over here is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Up here is the Damascus Gate and the road leading to Damascus. Okay. All right, so we'll stop there. We don't want to go into Jebel Musa. All right. So the point of that is to and I guess this last map shows it actually quite well. If you go to Jerusalem today, all right, these are going to be, this black line is where you're going to see the city walls. But they're from 1535. They're about 500 years old. Okay? This quarter of the city, more or less, is what used to be the Temple of David and Solomon, and it has become the Dome of the Rock, the third most sacred place for Islam in the world, after Mecca and Medina, and then Al-Quds, Jerusalem. Over here is the Church of the Resurrection, or the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the holiest place in the world for Christians, because this is the crucifixion site and also the empty tomb. Okay. Down here, this is Jerusalem in the Old Testament, but it's no longer part of Jerusalem. It's sort of been left out. But we still have the Kidron Valley, we still have the Hinnom Valley, and the other little valley that used to run through here, the Central Valley, that is actually, we go back to the Madaba map, that's this road here. That's the old Central Valley. So when you come in the Damascus Gate today, you can go two ways. You can go to the left along the old Central Valley Road down to the temple and the Dome of the Rock, or you can go to the right and follow the road till you get to the Holy Sepulchre. Okay? And the Madaba map still works because that's the basic geography of the walled city, the old city of Jerusalem, even today. But in the time of Jesus, it would have looked something like that. Okay? All right, so we've probably used up our time, but there may still be a couple of questions you'd like to just check on before we say goodbye for the week. So back to you guys.
Okay, if anyone have any question, you can raise, because this is the good time. You can chat. You can.
क्वेसन छ कि
Uh,
म अलिकति आश्चर्यमा परेको कुरा यो इजरायलीलाई परमेश्वरले डुट्रो महबगको देशमा पुर्याउनु भएको भूमि पुरै ड्राई ल्यान्ड मात्र देखियो त के हो त्यो अहिले चाहिँ त्यो डुट्रो महबग्ने भूमि कतातिर छ त्यो अलिकति ग्रिनरी त्यहाँनिर फुलफुल भूमिहरू त देखिएन त यो उसमा त यात्रामा त अनि त्यो कुरा चाहिँ यसो देखाइदिनुहुन्छ कि
Okay.
त्यो बारे
In the Old Testament, the gods, through the Moses, people of Israel are brought into the place where the milk and honey were overflowing.
Yes.
So the pictures that in the north that we see all are dry land rather than the greenage. Where is the located? Where is this place where milk and honey overflowing place? Where is it located now?
Very good question. There is no such place. It was a real estate agent's advertising slogan, the land that flows with milk and honey. In other words, the land that is very fertile. You can harvest the honey, you can have cattle to make milk and so on. You can't have, no one has ever had cattle in the south of the country. It's too dry. If you want cattle, you have to go right up to the north, almost into Lebanon, up in Galilee. Then you can have cattle. And in the Old Testament, they talk about the bulls of Bashan, right up in the north. That's where you'll find cows and bulls. Okay, so in the south, it is very dry. It's never had a big population, and you could never actually run an empire from Jerusalem. There just aren't enough people there. So that's one of the interesting things about this story. A little bit further north in Israel, yes, there are more people, more prosperous, a lot greener. Not exactly milk and honey. Perhaps that's what they meant. They meant kind of Samaria and the plain of Jezreel. Very fertile, particularly the plain of Jezreel. But yes, the land that flows with milk and honey never quite worked out for them. It was much more difficult, particularly in the south, much more difficult.
So, which means can we say that God has told the Moses about the whole country of the Israel instead of like a particular one specific place, because since they are coming back to their hometown.
Yeah, we'll see that. We think about the stories that are in that part of the Old Testament. These are people that have never lived there. They were in Egypt for like 400 years, more than 400 years. Not the same person, but their families lived in Egypt for more than 400 years, according to the Old Testament. And before that, they actually came from Babylon, Abraham and so on. They came from Ur of the Chaldees. So they were never local people. Okay, they were coming in to take over the land. Now, compared with the desert, yeah, the Shephelah is a place where you can grow grapevines and olive trees and so on. But Palestine is not actually as fertile and beautiful a place as, say, Lebanon. It is still fairly dry and fairly challenging. So why does the Old Testament say that God was promising them a land that flows with milk and honey? Well, I guess this was the country they ended up having, and they saw it as being given to them by God. And when God was blessing them, then they could live well. And it didn't actually flow. I mean, it's an exaggeration to say the land is flowing with milk and honey. If it did, it'd be terrible. Everything would be sticky. There'd be stale milk everywhere. But it's like saying, I've told you 1,000 times, don't do that. Well, I've probably told you twice, but I mean, you know. So it's an exaggeration to say this is our beautiful country and we love it. This is a land that flows with milk and honey. Well, not quite.
Okay. I think we can believe like God's intention for the people of Israel is like it is God's own. I mean, it is God's blessing, and it is the country that you can live with the peace. And I think in that sense we can understand.
Yeah.
Instead of like a river of honey or river of milk flowing over and everywhere and it's sticky.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, the prophets are, so the prophets are really saying, if you live the covenant, if you treat people the way God wants you to treat people, then God will bless you in this land, and it will be a land that flows with milk and honey.
Okay.
Yeah, but most of the time they didn't. Yeah, they didn't treat each other.
जस्तो त्यो क्यालेब र यशुले एउटा ग्रेप्सको दुईजनाले बोकेर लगेको छ नि कतिपय मान्छेहरूले अहिले पनि त्यो हाम्रो इभन बाइबल कलेजमा हामीलाई त्यो फोटो देखाइरहेको थियो क्या हाम्रो प्रोफेसरले त्यो इजरायलको यो ल्यान्ड एन्ड हनी के भन्छ मिल्क एन्ड हनीको यो चाहिँ आशिष ल्यान्ड हो भनेर त्यो त्यहाँ त्यो अङ्गुरको ठुलो झुप्पोको फोटो देखाइरहेको थियो अनि त्यो परमेश्वरबाट आशिष भएको भूमिमा यसरी चाहिँ के भन्छ जमिनले चाहिँ उब्जनी दिन्छ भन्ने खालको कुराहरू गरिराखेको थियो त्यहाँ त पुरै डेजर्टै डेजर्ट देखाएको छ यो अहिलेको हेर्दामा त अन्त त्यो ठुल्ठुलो अङ्गुरको झुप्पा पनि धुनीहरू त देखेन त भनेर
प्रश्न अङ्गुरको झुप्पाहरू चाहिँ कहाँ पाइन्छ त्यसो भने हैन भन्न खोजेको
त्यो ल्यान्डहरु त
Okay. The question is
दुईजनाले बोकेको थियो 12 स्पाईहरु मध्ये हैन दुईजनाले चाहिँ लिएर जान्छ नि त हामीले अङ्गुरको फल ल्याउ त्यहाँको भनेर भन्छ नि त
Okay, then in the Old Testament there is like a spy Caleb and Joshua who came to the place and see the grapes, the big huge bunch of grapes and then they took and they said, now this is the grapes that we have seen. And even the professor, particular professor in the Bible college in Nepal here is that this is the promised land that God has given. There's a lot of the grapes and so on and so forth. So during our session, we have seen all the rocky place. Then where these grapes can find in Israel? Is there any place that we can find the grapes as mentioned by our lecturer and also same time in the Old Testament in the Bible?
Well, I don't want to disagree with your lecturer, but no. I think we're dealing with legends here, and in legends everything gets exaggerated. Like the grapes were so big, you had to need 3 people to carry a bunch of grapes. Well, there are no grapes like that anywhere in the world ever. In terms of grapes, you could grow grapes, as we saw, in the southern part of the Shephelah, close to the Philistines. But there are, I mean, nobody has ever seen these huge grapes. There's nowhere in Palestine that grows fruit like that. The most fertile part of Palestine is actually beside the Sea of Galilee, and that's where today they grow bananas and where they used to grow sugarcane. But they don't grow grapes that are this big. I mean That's an exaggeration. That's a legend. Wow, look at this blend. I mean, you could make a bottle of wine out of one grape. Well, no, it doesn't. There's never been grapes like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Thank you very much.
yeah, I would have to reluctantly disagree with your lecturer. Yeah.
Okay, anyone has anything? कसैको केही छन् भने यो एकदम जिज्ञासाहरू छन् भने सोध्नुहोस् है।
एउटा क्वेसन सोध्छु है।
ल ल
के अरे यो एरोस्लिम मन्दिर छ नि, त्यतिखेरको समयमा यीशु ख्रीष्टको समयमा चाहिँ त्यही मन्दिरमा कतिजना अगमवक्ताहरूले अनि परमेश्वरले पनि त्यहाँ धेरै त्यो ठुल्ठुलो कामहरू चाहिँ त्यो ठाउँमा गर्नुभयो। अहिले चाहिँ हामी सुन्छौँ त्यहाँ चाहिँ अब के अरे हो कि होइन थाहा छैन, तर मुस्लिमले चाहिँ भनौँ न त्यहाँ जस मुस्लिमको मस्जिद छ भन्ने कुराहरू हामी सुन्छौँ होइन। किन चाहिँ त्यस्तो भयो? त्यतिखेर चाहिँ त्यस्तो काम अब त्यत्रो भवन निर्माणदेखि लिएर प्रभुको जन्मको समयमा चाहिँ त्यस्तो भएको त अहिले चाहिँ किन भनौँ न अनाज्ञाकारी भएर हो कि ना प्रभुको डर नराखेर कि के भएर चाहिँ त्यो अहिले त्यो अवस्थामा चाहिँ हुन पुग्यो भने जिज्ञासा चाहिँ के हो?
The question is that if we see in the Old Testament, there are a lot of miracles and a healing, even in the Jesus' time, we can see a lot of miracles in the temple. In the temple gates and in the temple, there are a lot of the God's miracles were there. But in the present day, as we heard that the temple is somewhere captured by the Muslim. So the question is, why does this happen? Is that due to the due to the disobedience of the people of God, or results of disobedience, or what else? Why it happens?
Oh, okay, that's a big question. Firstly, miracles. Miracles in the Bible really only happen at 3 times in the story. There are miracles around the time of Moses and Joshua. That's a cluster of miracles. There are miracles in the time of Elijah and Elisha, but nothing in between, and nothing before Moses. No miracles with Abraham, no miracles with Jacob, no miracles with Isaac, no miracles with Joseph. He has dreams, but there are no miracles. So miracles, signs and wonders, if you like, they are clustered around the time of Moses and the Exodus, particularly Moses and Joshua, particularly Moses. Then we find miracles again in the time of Elijah and Elisha, roughly 850 BC. And then there are miracles in the time of Jesus and the early chapters in the book of Acts. So, yeah, around the time of Jesus and the very early church. Other than that, the Bible doesn't actually have miracles. They're clustered at 3 very significant points in the story of salvation. So that's something to ponder and see. Now, why would it be like that? Why would miracles only be there when something really special is happening? Okay. In terms of the temple site, this is really, really complicated and tricky and delicate. From one perspective, from a Christian perspective, the temple is no longer needed because Jesus is the sacrifice that takes away sins. There are no more need for animal sacrifices in the temple. Some Christians would believe that, and certainly some Christians in the ancient times believed, that the destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple was a punishment on the Jewish nation because of what happened to Jesus. Okay. Now, actually, it was the Romans who killed Jesus, not the Jews. So it doesn't quite work out that way. But certainly, from a Christian point of view, we'd have to say there's no need for a temple anymore, from a Christian perspective. Okay. Most Jewish people also think that, because Jewish religion changed, and instead of being focused on the temple, it became focused on studying the Torah and studying the Talmud. And so for almost 2,000 years, there have been no sacrifices, but people pray and read the Bible and study the Bible and keep the festivals. So many Jewish people do not want the temple to be brought back. That would totally change their religion, take it back to something that might have been 2,000 years ago. Meanwhile, the Muslim story. Well, it's not that the Muslims captured the Jewish temple. When Jerusalem surrendered to the Muslim armies in 642, whatever the exact date was, it was a Christian town. And the Christians in Jerusalem and the Bishop of Jerusalem, Patriarch of Jerusalem, surrendered to the Caliph, Omar, because they were very happy to be liberated by the Muslims and set free from the Byzantine Empire. So Omar, the Caliph, comes into Jerusalem and the Patriarch welcomes him. Ahlan wa sahlan. Welcome, welcome. Takes him to the Church of the Resurrection and says, please come inside and pray. You're welcome. Please come, say a prayer inside our church. And Omar said, La Habibi, no, I can't do that. Because if I come inside your church and pray, my soldiers will turn it into a mosque. Okay? So what happens? Over on the other side of town, a couple of 100 meters away, there is an empty set of ruins, which used to be the temple. And the Christians left it as a ruin in order to go, nah, we won. Okay? That's what's going on there. The Christians did not build anything on the Temple Mount because they wanted to show the world, and particularly the Jewish people, that God was with us and not with them. So the Christians left the temple site empty, nothing there, just rubbish. So the Muslims said, well, we want to build a mosque. Let's build it here. Nobody's using this. So they didn't capture the temple and take it off the Jewish people. It was empty land, which was also important to them because the rock, as in the Dome of the Rock, but the rock in the Muslim tradition, that's the rock from which Muhammad, peace be upon him, ascended up into heaven in the night vision and came back to that rock. So the Dome of the Rock is at a place which is very, very sacred for Muslims, as well as being perhaps the rock where Abraham sacrificed Isaac, or almost sacrificed Isaac. So it's not that the Muslims took the temple off the Jewish people. The Romans took the temple off the Jewish people. The town became Christian in the Byzantine period. The Christians left the temple site empty. And when the Muslims came hundreds of years later, rather than knock down a Christian church to build a mosque, they took the empty piece of land over there to build a very, very beautiful building, the Dome of the Rock, which is a spectacularly beautiful house of prayer. So it's really complicated. And maybe the challenge of Jerusalem is that God is wanting those three faiths, the three Abrahamic religions, Jews, Christians, Muslims, to find a way to live together in peace as a message for the world. And instead of fighting over the city and saying, no, it's my city, no, it's my city, perhaps if Jews and Christians and Muslims can live together beautifully and happily and with harmony in Jerusalem, maybe that will be a message from the God of Abraham to all the nations of the world. And it's not about rebuilding a temple or taking the real estate back from the Muslims or whatever. But it's very complicated. Obviously, some Jewish people want to build a new temple. That will mean destroying the Muslim temple, the Dome of the Rock. That will lead to more killing and more suffering and more anger. What does God want us to do? To make anger or to make peace? That's the big question, isn't it? Well, I guess we know the answer, but how to do it is the tricky part. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
So yeah, now we generally because we have understanding of like Muslim revolts against the Christianity and then destroy everything and took over. But thank you for clarification. So it's not Muslim took over, but Roman soldier took over, but Christian left the place, but Muslim used the empty place to build the mosque. So is really good. अरू कसैको
अनि एउटा कुरा कि त्यहाँ अनि मन्दिरमा त्यो सन्दुक पनि हुन्थ्यो हैन त सन्दुक हुन्थ्यो तर त्यो अनि त्यो चाहिँ के गर्यो त मुस्लिमहरूले नै लियो कि के गर्यो त्यो सन्दुक त हुन्छ मन्दिर भएपछि त त्यतिखेरको समय त सन्दुक बिना त हुन्थेन नि त
Okay, the ark in Old Testament time, in the temple there should be the Ark of Covenant. There should be the Ark of Covenant. I mean, like so. Where does this Ark of Covenant kept?
Wow. We don't know. It was presumably taken away by the Babylonians when they captured Jerusalem and destroyed the temple.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, there are lots of legends about what happened to the Ark of the Covenant. Now, I have another meeting starting in about 8 minutes, so I need to go up to the cathedral for this meeting. So I'm going to have to excuse myself.
So, yeah, okay. If you have any question, we make sure that your question is ready for next week.
Yep.
And if you have like long question where we need more time to explain, please write it to me the question, and so that I can forward to him, so that we can have a better understanding and also more time to discuss and also listen from the lecturer. So if you have any short questions, and please drop to me so that I can forward to him, and so that we learn more, because it's very interesting. First time, I think, for the Nepali people, we have this wonderful privilege of learning. There are many things which is really, really wonderful, which is we never heard about it, but now we are learning. Please keep learning and make sure that you have a question, send to us so that we can send. If not, prepare question for next week. So we'll see you next week. And may the Lord bless you. So we pray, and then we depart from here. We also want to thank you, Badin, for a wonderful time together with us. So may I request Reverend Dan to pray for our dismissal so that we can depart from here. Unmute Ganu Raja. Rana, unmute.
Okay. I practice, right? Lord, thank you for this wonderful privilege that you have given to us, Lord. We really praise you, we really honor you and exalt you, Lord Father God. Thank you for this privilege to understanding the word that you have given us, Lord. Thank you for this privilege, Lord. Father God, Lord, you are the mighty one who gives us the knowledge and power and the strength to us. Lord, continue the spirit as we come together again for the next week, Lord. As we are departing now, Lord Father, keep your spirit and keep your protections to all over the people here, Lord. Thank you, Father God. Everything we ask in your mighty name, we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dean, for a wonderful time. We'll see you next week. If any question comes, I will write it to you.
That'll be great. I've only just now seen the chat things. I was busy with the slides, but I think we've covered everything that was asked in the chat.
Thank you.